Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we are doing another monthly Q&A video. I have 6 pages of questions here provided by the fantastic fine folks on the Forgotten Weapons Patreon. They provided about twice that many questions, but I had to pare it down to only 6 pages because my voice won't do 12 pages worth of questions. We'll see if I can get through all of these. I will give it my best shot. And my best shot today will be aided by some Kiro wood smoke rye whiskey. I really like Kiro. I found out about this distillery about 5 years ago when I went and visited them up in Iso-Kiro in Finland. They make a 100% rye whiskey that is kind of like nothing else out there. Double pot stilled, so it's like the best of Scotch making technology and tradition, combined with some American whiskey making techniques. Fantastic stuff. At a fantastic price point too. And today I am going to be drinking what is almost the last of my bottle of wood smoke. This is the malt prior to fermentation is smoked over alder in a barn for 24 hours, which gives it this really nice, subtle sort of campfire aesthetic once you get the final whiskey out. So, by the way, if you're interested in trying out some of this yourself, if you're in the US, Finland, or Germany, you can go to their web store and use the code HolidaySpirit10 to get 10% off any of their spirits, like the wood smoke rye. So check that out. I will include a link in the description text below. And instead of having it neat like I normally do today, because it's Christmas Eve, I'm going to go and make an old-fashioned out of this, which will just add a little bit of sophistication to it and should be very nice. There are many different ways to do an old-fashioned. I am going with a very simple one. We're going to go with 2 ounces, or a little more than 2 ounces of whiskey. Pour that in there. And then, pretty simple, 2 dashes of bitters. I'm going to be all snooty and use Fee Brothers bitters. There we go. And a little bit of sweetener, which for the wood smoke, actually, maple syrup makes a fantastic alternative to just plain sugar and really enhances the note that's already in there. So, usually this calls for like a full teaspoon. I'm going to go with half a teaspoon because I don't want it too sweet. There we go. And then I'm going to be totally unsnooty and use refrigerator ice maker ice. Stir that out. And strain the ice out. Mostly successfully. Now we can get on with the show. Oh, that is a fantastic Christmas Eve drink. All right, now let's get into the first of our questions. And the first one comes from Gun Dr. Bob, who says, my EDC is a PPK, primarily because the stainless steel construction doesn't seem to mind everyday use. However, my Astra Constable is every bit the equal of it. I'd be grateful to hear your thoughts and comments concerning the borrowing of technologies by designers who seem to have no shame in standing on the shoulders of others. Maybe I suppose it's just a matter of practicality and expedience. That's part of it. All firearms design is one designer standing on the shoulders of the ones who came before. The problem is people don't want to buy a completely unique artisanal pistol that is notably objectively inferior to something else. People always want to take the best elements of all the things that are available on the market and put them together and make the best overall pistol that they can. And with things like firearms, you're never like, we figure out what works pretty well pretty quickly, and those are the design elements that people use. There are some elements where it is a matter of choice. You know, do you want the rotating barrel versus the tilting barrel? There really are some pros and cons each way, and so we see designs continue to survive with both styles. But a lot of stuff, once someone figures out, well, a good example would be firing pin blocks. Once someone figures out the really good, efficient way to do a plunger-style firing pin block in a striker-fired pistol, virtually everybody just copies that mechanism because it works really well. And frankly, we've seen one of the results of what happens when someone doesn't copy that with the SIG 320. I'm not saying the firing pin block is the only issue with it, but the firing pin block is certainly an issue with it. And the P365, with a traditional normal style of firing pin block, doesn't have the same issues. So I think we see the same thing, especially in automobiles. If you go back and look at car designs from 100 or 120 years ago, there's some wildly, radically different stuff. And you see companies like forefront of development by having front-wheel drive. And then today, these things are just taken as standard, and no one even bothers to acknowledge, generally speaking, who first came up with any of these various technologies or systems. The same thing in firearms. We're going to take the stuff that works best, we're going to integrate it, and when we have a period like we're in right now, where there isn't much fundamental change, or isn't any fundamental change in the technology, in the base components, people are just optimizing for that last couple of % of efficiency in the various mechanisms that they use. So yeah, once Walther designs the PP and the PPK in the 1930s, they figure out how to do it pretty well, and by the when was the Constable made? 60s, 70s? It's not that complicated, and it's very easy for another company to take the design, copy it, and reintroduce it. I do also want to touch here briefly on patents. A lot of people think that once you come up with an idea or a design, you patent it, and then you're the only person who can use it. They don't really work that way. Patents are always for a limited time period. A lot of people get patents and copyright confused. Copyright is ownership of a creative thing. You paint a painting or write a book, you have the right to that creation, and other people can't reproduce it without your permission. Even copyrights have a limited lifespan, although thanks to primarily the Disney company, it's a limited lifespan of like 95 years from the death of the creator, I think, at this point. Patents cover a specific mechanical design, a mechanical feature, and they only last for between 15 and 20 years, 23 years. There are some variations to the time frame, but typically within 20 years a patent is done and over with, and then there's absolutely no legal problem with copying someone else's mechanical design on something that you are manufacturing yourself. So, next question is from Matt. Oh yeah, yeah. A little bit of maple syrup is fantastic in there. We're going back to the 320 again. Matt says, even though it failed the technical evaluation, Switzerland has announced adoption of the P320 based on it being the lowest cost, which is kind of why it always wins. However, there are caveats that issues must be fixed and production must be done in Switzerland. Do you think Swiss production quality will solve the issues? Do you think the Swiss re-engineering will result in finding or releasing the causes of uncommanded discharges? I think Swiss engineering will solve the problems. I still don't have any real confidence that I know what the problem with the 320 is. My suspicion is that it is something related to parts tolerance stacking and low-cost manufacturing and QC. But beyond that very generic sort of claim, I couldn't tell you exactly what parts are stacking in what ways to cause specific problems. I think under Swiss manufacturing control, there will be a tighter QC regimen than SIG has for its general production, and I don't think the Swiss will probably have any real problems with these pistols. However, what is really weird to me about the Swiss adoption is, as Matt says, they adopted the gun because of its low price. I think it was Glock was actually the only company to meet the technical requirements for the Swiss procurement, but then SIG was cheap enough below Glock that the Swiss just went for it. The problem is if you're producing it in Switzerland, you're not getting the cost that you would get if you were buying them from SIG in New Hampshire. Like, manufacturing is going to be way more expensive if you're using Swiss labor to do it. So I don't know. Maybe there's something else going on here. Like maybe Glock, maybe they have to have it Swiss produced and Glock wasn't willing to give them a license to produce in Switzerland. Again, total speculation. I don't know if any of the elements in that supposition are true, but something like that could explain, help to explain the 320 adoption. Maybe there's someone in the Swiss military infrastructure who still thinks that SIG is a Swiss company when like the SIG Sauer that they bought those 320s from is a company in New Hampshire, United States. Anyway, it'll be a fine pistol for them. I don't think they'll have any trouble because they're going to be paying a lot more for them by making them in Switzerland. To my mind, like I don't really understand, you know, the P320 does not do anything good that other pistols don't do already. So I don't get why the Swiss would have adopted it. Matt also has a second question here. Given your opinion of the 6.8x51, we're going to see if we can get all the SIG stuff out of the way, especially in the hybrid case form, what is your opinion of other high-pressure cartridge designs such as 7mm Backcountry? I think high pressure is done, there's only one reason to have an abnormally high-pressure cartridge, and that is to get a high muzzle velocity relative to barrel length. So I don't know anything about 7mm Backcountry. I probably should have looked it up before I did this Q&A, but I didn't bother to. I'm just going to go on the assumption that it is essentially a Magnum style hunting cartridge based on the name. And what they are almost certainly trying to do is get a couple 100 feet per second extra out of a reasonable length hunting rifle barrel for whatever specific bullet weight is optimal for what they're doing. And you do that by cranking up the pressure a bit. You can either make the case capacity bigger or you can increase the pressure. If you make the case capacity bigger, typically you're going to make the cartridge longer, and I bet 7mm Backcountry is maxed out for overall length for whatever receiver size it's designed for. And so if you want to make it, give it more performance, you crank up the pressure. There are downsides to this. It's going to have more recoil. It's also, the downside most people are going to come up with is that it will burn out barrels. It will cause more throat erosion more quickly than a lower pressure cartridge because you have higher heat and pressure of gas hitting the area where the rifling starts. And that over time will erode the rifling, which will degrade your accuracy. Now, on a hunting rifle, I don't think that matters because even on the cartridges that are most accused of being, you know, absolute barrel burning, like temporary use barrels, we're talking about 1,000 rounds until you get up into like small cannon stuff, and then it can be a couple hundred. But typically, any of these cartridges will go 1,000 rounds before the barrel needs to be replaced. And the barrel only needs to be replaced at that point if you're worrying about keeping that just cutting edge accuracy from a brand new barrel. And I think most hunters are less concerned about that. And frankly, you're not putting 1,000 rounds in any rapid time period through your hunting rifle. I think most people are going to zero it. They're going to practice with it, hopefully once in a while, and they're going to take it out hunting and fire somewhere between 0 and like 3 rounds through it in the course of a hunting trip. So to me, if that velocity is something that you actually get benefit from, you know, if you need the extra velocity, and I think there's a lot of inflation in hunting cartridges, people shooting stuff, like you don't need 338 Lapua Magnum on a whitetail deer. But if you actually need that extra velocity, going to a higher pressure for a hunting cartridge is a fine option because burning out the barrel doesn't really matter. It's not that big of a problem. Sean says, I don't think you have weighed in on FRTs or SuperSafeties. What's your take? I think full auto is really fun and really cool, and I don't think the NFA is a constitutional law, and I would love to do more machine gun shooting and have more access to it. I do not own an FRT or a SuperSafety for a couple of reasons. As I see it, the legal standing of these things right now is pretty precarious. Like it's, as far as I can tell, it is all based on one agreement not to prosecute one company. And it's something that could change literally overnight with our current president. Like, he can change on a whim, literally on a whim. And maybe tomorrow he wakes up on the wrong side of the bed and someone says something to him about FRTs or SuperSafeties, or there's a crime committed with one, and he just says, ban them all, like with bump stocks. And it just happens. I will be more confident in owning one once there's actually some more substantial legal basis for them being legal. I want to see like a court decision. I want to see a fairly high level court decision affirming that they are legal to own. Now, keep in mind, my perspective on this is going to be a little bit different than most people's because I'm making videos with a whole lot of views. Like, I've had ATF agents come up to me and go, "Hey, I love the work you do. Keep it up. We like watching your videos," which is mildly terrifying. I'm not going to go put something like a super safety or an FRT in public view on a video if I think there's any chance that it will be adjudicated illegal and potentially cost me the ability to own firearms at all ever for the rest of my life. So it ain't worth it to me. That's a very different judgment call if you're someone who maybe wants to own something and take it out to a private range in the desert or in the mountains once in a while and have a good time with it. Like, you do you, whatever, not my problem. But I'm not going to put one of those things on camera without a much stronger legal basis for it. Do I think that they are machine guns? I mean, I'm not even going to get into that. How about that? I'm just going to leave that one alone because I don't want to prejudice any sort of court cases or anything one way or the other. The other thing for me, if these were legal, like 100% totally legal, no doubt about it whatsoever, I would be interested in them for pistol caliber carbines, essentially for making submachine guns. To me, the idea of full auto in a shoulder rifle just isn't all that appealing. It's fun, like it's neat to go do from time to time, but there's no real practicality to it because it's hard to control and you will get better results in semi-auto with a rifle than you will in full auto. That's why a lot of, like, there's a surprising number of military rifles out there that were actually only semi-auto. Generally, it's the .308 caliber ones, not so much the 5.56s, because 5.56 is more easily controlled in full auto. But to me, 9mm, that's where full auto is awesome. Throw one of those things in a 9mm PCC. Like, in fact, the one that comes to mind is H&R's Department of Energy carbine, the little 7.5-inch 9mm AR. That would be awesome with a switch in it. The Car 15 SD, that thing would be awesome with an FRT or a super safety or just a legit straight up full auto trigger group. But select fire shoulder rifles, 5.56, 7.62x39, 308, I'm just not that interested in. If I'm going to shoot a rifle cartridge in full auto, I want it to be like a 15-pound rifle on a bipod. I want it to be essentially a light machine gun. Those are also really fun, but the intermediate, not really my cup of tea. B. Davis says, is it hard watching war movies? Are you able to ignore all the weapons-related inaccuracies, or do you enjoy noticing every wrong detail? Well, both. I enjoy noticing the wrong details because sometimes they make really good videos to make. In general, I don't let it get to me. Like, it's a war movie. There's always going to be some, assumption of disbelief, and I'm happy to just roll with it. There are some places where it can be pretty hard to overlook. Like if the rest of the movie's really bad and then the guns are also really badly done or badly handled, like that can be a problem for me. But in general, like if someone did a good job and put honest effort into making a good war movie, I'm happy to overlook minor issues with the firearms. Let's see. Captain Dan says, what do you think of the new 338 Norma machine guns like Ohio Ordnance Works Reaper, General Dynamic LWMMG, many initials here, SIG's MMG 338, even Zastava and Norinco are developing 338 machine guns. Do you think the adoption of one of these will be more widespread than just Special Operations Command use? Will you be able to get your hands on any to review? I think they're very interesting. I would definitely like to get my hands on any of them to review. I've been offered one or two of them. I just haven't had the logistical opportunity to get out and actually do some video with it. The reason that these things are happening, I think, is 50 BMG is not a particularly efficient cartridge. It's still in use because there's so much infrastructure and it works really well, and the M2 is an amazing piece of technology. And most of the time, if you're shooting something in a 50 cal machine gun range, it's mounted on a vehicle, and you don't really care how much the gun weighs or how much its ammo weighs. And do you really care how efficient the bullet is 2,500 meters downrange? Not really. But guys started getting into positions where they wanted to be able to hump these guns on foot. And you're not taking, no patrol is taking a Browning M2 and ammo with them. Like, no special operations patrol is going to do that. It's just way too much weight for what you get. But if you take a high-performing 338 Magnum cartridge, you're getting, in some cases, better technical performance than 50 BMG. Not quite as heavy of a bullet, but better trajectory, better accuracy, and a lot of potential impact downrange from a 338 Norma mag or 338 Lapua mag. And now we're talking about a gun, a cartridge with a lot less power and recoil, or more efficient power, less recoil, something that you can build an actual man-portable gun around. And that's where all of these 338 machine guns come from. So yeah, I think they're very interesting. I think there's a definite path forward that would involve kind of getting rid of 50 BMG and replacing it. I guess you probably wouldn't completely get rid of 50, but if you were starting a force from scratch, there's a really good argument to make of just skip 50 caliber entirely. Your heavy infantry guns are 338 Magnums, and then you skip from that up to a light cannon, a 20 millimeter cannon, a 15 millimeter cannon, something like that that's dedicated for vehicular sort of use, because the man-portable guns are going to be way more portable than anything in 50, and the light cannons are going to have more effectiveness and, frankly, probably still be lighter than your 50 calibers. There's just so much institutional inertia around 50 cal. Frankly, in the Western militaries with the Browning M2, and also in the Soviet, the old communist bloc, Eastern Bloc militaries with the Dishka and their 50 caliber cartridge, which is not the same as US 50, but functionally interchangeable, not technically, practically interchangeable. Land Cruiser says, it appears the two most common general-purpose machine guns in service today are variants of the FN Mag 58 and variants of the Soviet PK or /PKM, with the MG42/MG3 a distant third. Which do you think is the better design? What's your take on the future of the Mag 58 and the PK over the next 50 to 100 years? I think in 50 years, there will absolutely still be both of those guns in service, and there might be in 100, maybe. They're both amazingly outstanding firearms, but in slightly different ways. If it's a gun you have to pick up and carry with you, the PK is the better of the two. If it's a gun that you are going to mount on a vehicle, on the top of a Jeep or a truck, or you name it, whatever, a boat, the Mag 58 is the better gun. The Mag 58 is just an unkillable brick of a gun. It's a belt-fed upside-down BAR, kind of, essentially. It weighs substantially more than a PK, and it will just run till the end of time. The PK is, you might call it, like the light machine gun or the general-purpose machine gun version of the AK, in particular because the K in both of them is both Kalashnikov. It was actually Kalashnikov's design team that developed the PK, and it uses a lot of the same principles as the AK. But one of those is that it uses a stamped receiver, and so it does have a lifespan. It's a really good, reliable gun, but it's not one that's going to survive endless belt dumps till the end of time in the way that a Mag 58 kind of does. So they're both excellent. They will both absolutely be around in 50 years, and they both could be around in 100. If I had the choice, I would prefer to have a PK, well, a PKM. The modernized one would be a little more preferable. But that's because it's a gun that I would want to be able to actually carry around on foot. And a Mag 58 is really heavy. You can do it. A lot of guys have done it. The Mag 58 was the light machine gun, support machine gun for a lot of different armies, and they did it. But man, that is a heavy gun to lug around. Charles says, I'm always amazed by the depth and breadth of your camo and uniform collection. Do you have some sort of crazy camo concierge, or is this the result of years of picking through foreign surplus stores while filming overseas? Bonus question, are surplus stores as we understand them in the US even a thing overseas? So first off, on the bonus question, yes, there are absolutely surplus stores overseas. There are a couple in Paris that I try to get to whenever I get over there because they occasionally have some cool stuff. But yeah, totally. Surplus stores overseas are not that much different than surplus stores here. There's a lot of airsoft overseas. There's paintball overseas. There's people wanting the same sort of stuff we have in military surplus stores here over basically everywhere else. And a lot of that stuff isn't legally restricted in any way in Europe, just like it's not legally restricted over here. Now, as for the main question, my uniform and camo collection largely is just the result of picking, like, just keeping an eye out for neat stuff for like 15 plus years now. I try to only buy camo when I can find something that is actually in my size, so I don't have a bunch of camo in weird sizes that I can't wear. I only buy it if it's something that I can actually wear, which means you've seen a bunch of it on camera over the years now. But I also like the weird stuff, so when it comes up and I have the opportunity, I will often grab a set of something cool, and you know, you do that for enough decades and you end up with a substantial amount of it if you don't ever sell it. I try to buy it fairly cheap. Usually it's fairly cheap. Americana Pipe Dream has frankly been very difficult for me because they have an incredible amount of really cool stuff that is often sold out before I can get to it in my size, which is a pretty, normal, medium, popular size. And also, man, their stuff can be really expensive. And I occasionally get something from them, but I always kind of like when I do it, because they have figured out what people are willing to pay for some of that weird, cool camo. I much prefer to get it at a weird gun show where it's on the bottom of a pile of weird junk, and some guy's like, I don't know what that yellow camo is, $20. And then you go home with a set of Egyptian camo that's super cool and fits you for $20. Anyway, this post not sponsored by Americana Pipe Dream, but I won't unsubscribe from their email list. I just hate myself every time they manage to successfully market me something. Mark says, if you were in charge of Project Grayburn, which rifle would you choose, and are there any other platforms in addition to the 4 already in the running that you feel should be considered? Project Grayburn is the British plan to replace the SA-80, not because they've finally decided that it's not good enough, because they've actually finally gotten it to the point with the A3 where it's a perfectly adequate rifle, but because the planned obsolescence date of Project SA-80 is, I believe, 2030. The idea is it was a 50-year rifle, 1980 to 2030. Actually went into service in 85, but they're going to have to replace them with something, or else just like continually rebuild the SA-80, the SA-80 of Theseus with all new parts forever. And I think they're ready to be done with that platform. Anyway, they're looking at all the usual suspects. Like, there aren't that many rifles that should be under serious consideration for a modern military to adopt. They are looking at the HK-416. They're looking at guns from Beretta, which could be the NARP, the new assault rifle project from Beretta, Italy, or, as my understanding, could be Sacco's new AR, made up in Finland for the Finns and the Swedes. They're looking at, of course, Knights. They've already adopted the Knights KS-1 for the Ranger Regiment and maybe someone else. To me, honestly, it doesn't really matter. If I had my druthers, I would go for a direct impingement AR, something like Sacco's ARG-40 is offered as a DI gun. The Knight's rifle is a DI gun. I'd go for one of those. I think for a standard infantry rifle, there are some benefits to that over the short stroke piston systems. But yeah, really nothing. There's nothing super out of the box and weird that I would recommend to them, because I think they've had enough of out of the box and weird, and they're ready for a very normal, very boring rifle that will just work when they get it, and they deserve that. Michael says, it's my understanding the Israeli Galil is based on the Finnish RK-62. That is correct. Somewhere along the way, the Galil was changed that magazines were not interchangeable. Do you know why? I'm thinking Valmet owners would like relatively cheap magazines. Yes, I do know why. The reason why is the Israelis with the Galil wanted 5.56 NATO, and the Finns with the RK62 wanted 7.62 by 39. So there were 5.56 versions of the RK60 70 series of the Valmets made in 5.5. There were 5.56 versions of the Valmets made and sold on the commercial market, as well as actually some little tiny military sales, but those ended up post-dating, I believe, the Israeli development of the Galil. So the Israelis get the RK62 system, and they're not going to use standard AK mags because they need a 5.56 magazine, so they design a 5.56 magazine, and that goes off on its own independent production run. Independently later, the Finns at Valmet are making commercial rifles, decide to go with 5.56, and design a 5.56 magazine for the guns, and that goes off on its own independent production streak because there's not really, like, Valmet is not making 5.56 AKs for the Israelis. They're not making Galils. And so there's not really a whole lot of push for them to have the same magazine in the two guns. The Israelis developed their magazine independently. Valmet didn't have it. Valmet had to develop something on their own, and so you end up with two that are very similar, but not strictly interchangeable, which is indeed unfortunate for Valmet, 5.56 Valmet owners today, because those Valmet mags are proprietary and can be very expensive. They're like $300 or $400 magazines now. There are some that can be converted. Actually, for mine, I have a couple of Tromix conversion Bulgarian 5.56 AK mags. Those are out there, but frankly, those are getting to be close to the same price as original Valmets, I think. I haven't bought any in a long time. But yeah, that's why. Rip Burger asks, any plans for collaborating with C&Rsenal again? Nothing specifically on the table. It would be fun. I'd be open to it. But really, that's something that would be up to Othais and May to propose. It doesn't help that they and I are like 3,000 miles apart, and it's not particularly convenient to travel between my place and theirs, especially with a whole bunch of guns. Project Lightning was a lot of fun, but it was financially not profitable. It was a production in the red. I don't know if it ever got into the black with poster sales and video sales, but I've heard Othais talk about it several times since, and it's not something that they're really looking to redo, just because it was a lot of time and money spent that they did not fully recoup. So I like Othais. I have no problem with working with Othais. It's just, it'd have to be something that made practical sense for both of us to do. So who knows, maybe. Ken says, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the MG42 and its derivatives are the longest serving general purpose machine gun of the 20th century. Do you think that any of the current modern GPMGs in service can expect to have as long of a service life? Funny, we kind of just talked about this. I think the PKM and the M240 have every potential of staying in service as long as the MG42. Frankly, probably longer. MG42 probably is the longest serving one currently in use, because it was one of the very first true belt-fed general purpose machine guns, which went on to be kind of the model for the tactical usage, the functional model for the PK and the Mag 240. So yeah, I think both of those will probably outlast the MG42, because I don't think anyone's making MG42 derivative guns anymore. They're still in service in a few places, but like I don't think Steyr's still making the Austrian ones. Like, people are starting to replace MG42s with things like HK MG4s, MG5s, and other modern 308 belt feds. Tyler says, why do you never hang out with us on Discord? Sorry, Tyler. There is, for those of you who don't know, there is a Forgotten Weapons Discord that you can access as a Patreon supporter of the channel, but I'm not in it simply because I do not have time to be hanging out on another chat. Not another, but I don't have time to hang out on a chat system. Like, I would burn all my time, and I am too busy doing video stuff and book stuff and gun stuff. And so I tried to make that very clear up front. Like, there is a Discord.
You won't find me in it, but there are other cool people in there. You know, hang out and chat with other Forgotten Weapons fans. I just like, it'd be really dangerous for me to try and get into a potentially addictive chat system like that. Daybreak says, I've been a gun owner for over a year now, and I still feel very paranoid about handling firearms, especially thinking about sweeping and backdrops, even when I've confirmed clear while inside my home. As a long-term gun owner, do you feel that this is reasonable, or does overcautious behavior inhibit becoming proficient in handling firearms? I don't think it's unreasonable. I think it's actually quite healthy that, like, there is a difference. Like, if you confirm that a gun's clear, and then you start disassembling it, and then, you know, you've got like the slide or the barrel or something, and you have an emotional problem with pointing the, like, just the gun barrel towards yourself, I think that is a bit of an overreaction. But the idea that when you have a fully assembled, intact firearm, paying attention to where it's pointed is absolutely 1000% a good habit. It's an important habit to build, and I think it's actually a valuable way to turn yourself into long-term a more proficient gun owner and gun handler. To me, one of the things that I see with really experienced competition shooters is they have pretty much relegated muzzle control to a subconscious part of their brain. Like, they're always paying attention at this little minuscule bit down here where the gun's pointed, and the gun's always pointed in a safe direction, and they can then, like, they can offload that to the, like, instinctual, habitual part of their brain and then go about doing other tasks, where newer shooters will typically have to devote a lot more of their conscious attention to keeping track of the muzzle. And so if you task load them with, you have to, like, look at this and get some data on it from that, and you also have to physically do this thing, and then you're also holding a firearm at the same time, you will see, like, their focus go to one task and the guns start to wander into unsafe directions. And the habit of always paying attention to where the muzzle's pointing, over time that builds into a subconscious thing that is excellent to have, truly excellent to have. So you can overdo it. Like, I occasionally get comments from people who seem to have a legitimately negative reaction to seeing a gun pointed at them on a video screen. Like, that's not rational. That's a little much, perhaps. But, like, if you're just always wanting to pay attention to where the gun's pointed, that's a good thing. Don't try and stamp that out. Try to make it as unconscious and as natural, just a part of handling a firearm. Patrick says, I'd love to hear more about the process your books take, from an idea in your head through to delivery. How much does your draft change as it goes through the editing process? What are the best and worst parts of that journey for you, both as an author and a publisher? All right, well, so for me, there are two components to doing a book. One is going to be data, and one is going to be photographs. And you need both. Depending on the style of book, you will need more of one than the other. So, for example, the Small Arms of World War II series that we're doing on Headstamp, through Headstamp, is not like a super revelatory, deep research project. It is much more of a coffee table style book. If you don't know about US World War II small arms, you'll learn, like, all of the mainline basic stuff about them from those books. But we're not going to try and get into, you know, what's this obscure proof mark? What are all of the different initials of the inspectors who looked at these guns? What was that one weird production batch that they did an extra 10 guns of in this different style? Like, we don't get into any of that sort of stuff. It's just, what are the standard guns that were issued during the war, and what's the basic story of how were they made, why were they made, how did they hold up, you know, what came before them, what came after them, that kind of material, which I think is what most people are mostly interested in. That level of data isn't hard to get because there's a lot of deeper research out there. So for those books, planning out, you know, can we do this? Should we do this? It comes down to, are we going to be able to get our hands on all of the relevant guns to take pictures of them? Because I'm not going to go out there and scrounge pictures off of Reddit. When we do books for Headstamp, we are trying to do as much as possible of the photography ourselves, specifically James Rupley, my business partner at Headstamp, is an amazing photographer, one of the very best in the firearm space. And so we want to come up with, okay, so we want to do small arms of World War II, United States. Springfield Armory has a lot, has all of those guns. So can we arrange a trip to Springfield Armory to do the photography? Yes, actually we can. And we did. So at that point, that's like having addressed, do I have the information to do a book? Yes. Do I have access to the guns to take pictures? Yes. Okay, let's move forward on this. Then it is a matter of plan out the scope. How much detail do we want to get into? For the sake of a World War II book, it would be things like, do we want to include shotguns? Do we want to include experimental things that were tested? And the answer for the World War II series is pretty much whatever cool stuff we get access to, we want to include, but we're not going to try and be 1,000% comprehensive, and we're not going to let perfection be the enemy of good enough. So for example, in the World War II book, there are one or two of the standard US combat shotguns that we don't have in there because we just couldn't find good examples of them to photograph. So we have the others, but we don't have the complete full scope of all the shotguns. Maybe at some point we'll do a second edition if we're able to find the extra two. But then I start writing. Sometimes I do the writing first, sometimes we do the photography first. That's just a matter of scheduling, because pretty much at that point we'll know what we need to photograph and what details on the guns need to be photographed. When I start writing, my structure, my procedure is to build out a table of contents. Here's everything I'm going to cover. And then I don't try to write from page 1 to page whatever the last page is. I take whatever I'm interested in on a particular day. I'm really into the submachine guns right now. So we're going to start and just start writing submachine gun sections. And I'll finish those off and be like, okay, cool. That's that section of the draft done. Now let's move on to pistols or sniper rifles or machine guns or whatever happens to catch my fancy. And then of course, once you get towards the end of this process, you may be super interested in one thing, but you know what? There's only one section of the book left. So switch gears and work on that piece. Once the full draft is done, you then have a couple layers of editing to go through. So first off, you're going to have technical review. You want to find some people who are subject matter experts in this specific area who are willing to read through your work and critique it and tell you when you did stupid, dumb things that are mistaken. So that can be a challenge to find people who both have the experience and the availability and the willingness to read through a draft. It sounds like a really cool opportunity, but it's actually, if you're going to do it seriously as a technical reviewer for a book, it's not a trivial task. The worst possible thing I can get in response from a tech reviewer is to send them a draft, and 3 weeks later, I get back a response that was like, oh yeah, it looked great. Looked great to me. Awesome. That's completely unhelpful because I guarantee you there are going to be some issues and some mistakes in it, or at least some matters of opinion where a subject matter expert ought to maybe differ in opinion on something with the author. And saying it's great gives you nothing to actually fix or improve, and frankly leaves some real question as to whether the person actually read the manuscript or not. For whatever reason, this is typically not a paid position. It is an honorarium or an honorary sort of thing. You're so incredibly smart, I would love to have you critique my work. So a lot of times it can be hard to find someone who's willing to actually take the time to do it seriously. And when you do find those people, treasure them. Treat them very well and give them big thank yous and make sure that they are well rewarded for the time they spent. And of course, they have to be knowledgeable enough to find errors in the work. So you'll go through that. It's best, in an ideal world, you would have 3 separate independent reviewers reviewing everything. That's a big ask. And sometimes you're lucky to get one person who's knowledgeable enough on a particular section of the manuscript to be able to review it. You then also have grammatical and typographical editing, which is just a matter of, are you using the right tenses everywhere? Are there literal typos in the work? Are you being consistent with things? Are you making the same abbreviations throughout the book? All just the really nitpicky, high school English teacher sort of of stuff. And that's equally important. So I always try to do the tech review first. Like, let's get the content right. And then the last element I want to do is go through and do the typographical corrections. Because otherwise you run the risk of introducing new typographical issues when you make changes to the content of the book during technical review. So at this point, the whole thing is just a big long text document, generally speaking. You then have to put it into an actual graphic layout. We have a fantastic graphic designer who does that work for Headstamp for us. He's been with us since the very first book we did, Chassepot de Famas. Justin Baird does a great job. And what I will do is send him a draft manuscript. The Finland book, Forged in Snow, was 110,000 words. And I have little bracketed comment notes in it every time I have an image with the image file name. James does the photography. James also does the photo editing. He would be a little annoyed if I left that out. The ongoing joke actually that we have is he will message me about something and he'll be like, you know, the World War II Britain book is done. It just has to be written, because he's the photo guy. And so once he's taken the pictures and done the editing on the pictures to, by the way, correct sharpness, correct white balance, correct coloration, saturation, there's a lot that goes into photo editing. Photo editing is a much more intensive process than actual photo taking and adds a huge amount to the quality of the end product. Anyway, while I'm doing the writing, typically he's doing the photo editing. We then send all of this to the graphic designer, who will put it together into usually something like Adobe InDesign, into a draft document. That then comes back and we have to do another revision edit cycle, several cycles usually on it, to make sure that the images are all properly reflecting what they're supposed to show, the captions are right, maybe we need to add some captions here and there. There's all sorts of additional elements that you want to proof and make sure everything looks the way you want it to look in a graphical format that go beyond the individual photographs themselves as well as beyond the text itself. Once that's done, then you can send it out to a printer. You'll get a quote on production price from the printer, which for our books can also be rather complicated because we've got a bunch of different versions and different color styles or cover styles. And once that's done, once you get the quote, you send them the PDF. They will then start working on it. They will send you the first thing you get are FNGs, folded and gathered, which is essentially all of the pages of the book without a binding. In fact, actually, I have one. Hold on. I'm glad I kept this. So this is the FNG that I got for review of Pistols of the Warlords. So when they print a book, it's not individual pages, it's giant sheets with typically, I think, 8 or 16 pages on each sheet. And so the folded and gathereds come back like this. So they'll print out the entire book in this format. It's not bound, it doesn't have a cover. I've got these individual page sections here. Yeah, this one, because it's large format, was 3 pages in each of these, like that. And that's that's kind of your last chance review. You flip through that, make sure that the print machines have colored everything correctly. It's your last chance to find any screw-ups that you made in it. Once you approve this, they will go ahead and print all of the pages for all of the books. Typically you'll get a sample cover to approve, just as a standalone cover. And once you approve the cover and the folded and gathered sections, then they will go ahead and bind them together. At that point, you will get a couple advance copies by airmail while they load the rest into a container and stick it on a big ship and send it over to the US. We have a warehouse in Tennessee that then, the books arrive on a boat at a port, they get loaded onto a train, they go by train to the warehouse where they get unpacked and then shipped out to customers like you guys by the warehouse. So, some of the things that to go back to the beginning of this process, if I'm thinking about doing a more reference-heavy book, the question then becomes usually, do I have the right information? Do I have access to enough, enough quantity and enough quality of information to do a proper book on the subject? So a good example would be like Madsen machine guns. I have nowhere near enough information in any of my reference material to do a book on Madsen light machine guns. So I'm not gonna. Finish small arms, I was able to put together enough reference material and enough sources and enough collections that I felt like I had access to enough to do a properly good book on the subject. And actually, I'm very happy with the way it's turned out. We're midway through this editing process right now on that one, by the way. Actually, more than midway. We're in the back half of the editing process. But yeah, there you go. How's that for an overview? That went a little longer than I expected it would. Slacker says, I've heard rumors from blogs that some Suomi KP31s were converted with MP40 magazine adapters like the MP41R, both in Finnish and German service. Is there any validity to this claim? There is none that I'm aware of. There was certainly never an official program to do it. It's certainly possible that some one-off armor somewhere did one, but in general, no. The reason that the MP41 was converted, the MP41, by the way, is a Papasha 41 converted to 9mm parabellum, and it's the ammunition that was the issue, not the magazines. The Germans captured a lot of Papashas, but they had zero 7.62 Tokarev ammunition in their own logistical train, and if they wanted to use these captured guns, they needed to convert them to 9 parabellum. If you're going to convert them to 9 parabellum, the existing magazines aren't going to be great. They might run, but like if you're doing that much work on the gun anyway, you might as well convert the caliber. And the Tokarev magazine is substantially longer than the 9mm parabellum magazines. And so there's a lot of available space in that magazine well to fit an adapter mechanism. Now, the MP40 magazine will fit in a Suomi magwell with a little bit of space to spare. You could almost certainly make an adapter that would fit and work, but there was never really any particular need. The Finns had maybe not plenty of magazines, but it was easier for the Finns to make more Suomi magazines than to try and coerce MP40 magazines out of the Germans. You know, late in the war, Germany was a little stingy with its military aid because it needed all of the stuff it could get for its own use. The Germans had some Suomis, but not very many, and it wasn't worth the development time to make conversions for them, as compared to the Papashas, which they got a crap load of, captured when they moved into, well, when they were fighting in Russia. So no, I'm not aware of any conversions. ERB2 says, with all the attention that ports on handguns are getting these days, I've noticed there doesn't seem to be any consensus on the best place to put them. Some manufacturers will place a series of small portholes along the length of the barrel, while others will have a large port near the end of the barrel. While I understand that a port on the end of the barrel offers the best leverage for the gases to affect recoil, it also provides those gases with the shortest period of time to work before the bullet leaves the barrel. Without having done a lot of technical research into the matter, I would expect that ports at the very end of the barrel are going to be the most effective. And I suspect that ports along the length of the barrel are as much there to look cool as they are to actually do stuff. In fact, once you get out of high-end competitive shooters, the purpose of a muzzle brake on a pistol, you know, ported recoil absorption mitigation thing, is really to look cool more than to actually work, because a lot of shooters don't really get the benefit of them. Like, you have to have a certain level of skill going in to be able to actually exploit the benefit that you get from a muzzle brake like that, and I think a lot of shooters don't have it. So there are some places where barrel, like porting in the barrel itself, is technically a better option. Shotguns are a good example, because if you put a big muzzle brake at the end of a shotgun, you have the potential to interfere with the shot cup and destroy patterns. Whereas if you have ports in the barrel along its length, the shot cup stays intact, goes past those ports, and then the gas can vent out the ports. So on shotguns, porting in the barrel is the better option. On pistols, a compensator at the end of the barrel is the better option. and everything else, I suspect, is mostly because it looks cool, and frankly, because it looks cool is responsible for a significant portion of firearm sales, at least in the United States, but frankly, probably everywhere. David says, are there any more non-firearm forgotten weapons in the queue or that you'd particularly like to do a video on? Yes, and that would be largely optics. In fact, I already have filmed the beginning of a series of videos on optics that will be starting next month. I visited Aimpoint and I filmed a bunch of early and experimental cool Aimpoint projects. And I've got a bunch of other optics stuff that I've wanted, like that's a series I've wanted to do for years now and just never really got around to. So that will be coming. I'm planning to do probably probably just one optics video per month for as long as I can. Dan says, I'm not sure if you've covered this before. Could you please give us a quick overview of the equipment you use, cameras, audio, lighting, etc., to record your episodes at home and on the road? Yes, I can. Although I'm using this equipment at the moment. So what I'm going to do is break out my backup camera, which is an iPhone, and I will go record my actual camera gear separately. So here it is. So this is what I film with. This is optimized for travel. I can either carry the Pelican case and throw the tripod in a suitcase or a backpack, or I actually have sort of a duffel bag backpack strap bag where I can put both of these in along with the black tablecloth, which has been traveling the world with me for many years now. Still use the same one. It works. Why change it? By the way, the tripod is extendable. It is just barely strong enough for my camera. It occasionally slips when I'm doing the over-the-shoulder style of filming, and the camera's a little too heavy for it, but it's nice and compact and super light, and so I keep using it. Inside the Pelican case, I have some hard shell foam that I custom cut out myself to carry all of my various stuff. And the configuration here has changed a bunch over the years. So like I used to actually have a boom mic that I carried in here, which I no longer do. So I just have some cables in there. The main thing is, of course, the camera. This is a Canon XA70. It is now a 4K camera, hence the last couple of years, I think. I've been recording in 4K, posting that. For a while, I was only posting 4K for patrons. It is now 4K everywhere. Unfortunately, I sized this for a previous slightly smaller camera. When I got this guy, the lens flare shade thing no longer fits in the setup, so I take that off and I carry it right there. Batteries. My microphone system is Sennheiser. It is just a single channel wireless receiver and transmitter along with a lavalier mic. This is my backup mic in case something goes wrong with the main lavalier. I haven't had to actually use that one yet. And then I actually have some charging infrastructure. Actually, it's all here. Yeah. So that's the charger for these two guys, battery charger for the camera batteries. This is very important. This allows me to connect the SD card from the camera to a USB slot to actually get the footage off of the camera. That's pretty much all there is to it. One thing that I really like with this, like a lot of people use DSLRs. I love the camcorder format for a number of reasons. First off, I don't have to worry about timing out. DSLRs, for whatever reason, always seem to have about a 10 or 15 minute maximum recording session time. This thing can go for hours, like, for example, a Q&A. I can also rotate the screen all the way forward. So if I am actually when I'm recording myself from the front, I can see what's going on. I can watch the audio bars, make sure I haven't lost audio or anything, battery in the audio hasn't died, make sure my framing is good, all that sort of stuff. So that is what I carry for filming on the road, and it's also the rig that I use at home and basically everywhere. One setup for everything. By the way, if you've noticed, occasionally I will have a video that gets uploaded with mono audio on one side only. That's because I'm recording audio as a mono single channel thing. And if I forget to, at the beginning of my editing, if I forget to change
it from single mono to just dual mono to duplicate the audio on both left and right channels. Then you end up with one where if you're listening on headphones, you only hear the audio in one ear. And I try really hard for that not to happen, and it tends to slip by like once or maybe twice a year. I'll have a whoops and have one that yeah, still has single channel, one side audio.
As for lighting, I use just in room, whatever lighting happens to be around, incandescent, fluorescent, whatever. One of the things that really makes it feasible, the thing that really makes it feasible for me to do the volume of content that I do, is that I don't have a lot of equipment and I don't have a lot of requirements for setup. You know, if I had a super high production standard crew going with me, we'd be setting up lights and we'd be doing special audio setups for everything, and you know, make sure the room's not too echoey and make sure the lighting's on all the right wavelengths and colors, and then I would be able to go into a museum and do 1 or maybe 2 videos a day. And instead, with this rig, I can do 5, 6, sometimes 7 videos in a day. I can be in and out. I have a low impact on the sites that are hosting me. And it's all thanks to you guys accepting a relatively low production standard of production quality, which I'm grateful for. The best example I can give of this is years ago, like pre-pandemic, I had the chance to visit Beretta's museum, and I was a far smaller channel at the time, but they let me in, and I had 3 hours, and I was pretty much just left alone in the Beretta Museum for 3 hours, and I was able to film 5 different videos on really cool guns, and it was only possible because I had this really lightweight, low impact setup. So I don't plan to change that anytime soon. Adam says, did DeserTech finally make casket magazines workable, or is that just more hopium-fueled voodoo? So DeserTech has made a quad-stack magazine. It's a 53-round quad-stack magazine for a proprietary AR lower, although they do have inserts that you can put in to use standard AR mags in it. I suspect, like a lot of quad-stack mags, they work fine 99% of the time, which unfortunately is not generally good enough for people who consider themselves serious users today. There's never been a quad-stack magazine that was good enough for what we would consider serious users today. Even those places where they get adopted into frontline military service, like for example, the quad-stack Suomi magazines, developed by the Swedes, used by the Swedes and the Finns ended up dropping them because they were prone to damage and not as reliable as the other magazine options out there. And I think for the average like hobbyist user, DeserTech's 53-round mags are great. They're probably just perfectly fine. You might occasionally get a malfunction. You get dirt in the mag, it's going to be harder to clean it out than a regular magazine. But you know what? If it's just for fun shooting at the range, go for it. Who cares? It'll be great. Like, you may not ever notice any problems. It's when you start putting a lot more serious wear and tear on the mags that the problems tend to come to light. The thing for me is I just don't, for the space that I can get, you know, the physical space that one of DeserTech's 53-round mags takes up, essentially I can just put 2 30-round mags in that same space and get the same effect. And I'm not really that concerned about changing magazines once in the middle. And it means that I don't have a new proprietary magazine that I have to take care of and deal with. And honestly, I just don't have the motivation to go out there and mess with one of their quad stack setups. Which is unfortunate. I'm sure they spent a lot of engineering time getting that magazine as good as they could possibly get it, only for the market response to kind of be like, eh. So, sorry, DeserTech. Chris says, the P90 magazine's rotating feed design has always struck me as potentially very useful, and I've been surprised we don't see something more like it. With the patent having expired in 2007, I would have thought that other P90-like firearms would have come to the market in calibers like 30 Super Carry, 50 AE, or 30 Carbine. Do you think the lack of similar magazines is just due to it not being worth the effort to design a new one, or ergonomics, or some other issue? I think the biggest issue for P90 style magazines, which is to say a magazine where the cartridges lay perpendicular to the barrel and then rotate 90 degrees during the feeding process, the big problem is you have to have basically perfectly cylindrical cartridges in order for that to work. When you see very long 9mm straight magazines, usually they either don't have a good reputation for working reliably, like 50-round Lanchester mags, or, well, that's the thing. If you look at the Czech ZB47, which had a 72-round straight 9mm stick mag, which was sort of a P90-ish style setup. I have a video on the ZB47. It's a fantastic firearm, but even the very narrow, very little bit of taper in the 9mm parabellum case was enough to prevent that magazine from running reliably, to the point that they actually developed a proprietary cartridge to use in the gun, which was essentially a perfectly straight-walled 9mm. Yes, most of these cartridges look straight-walled, but most cartridges have a little bit of taper to them because that dramatically aids in extraction. If the cartridge has any taper at all, as soon as you pull it back just slightly out of the chamber, it breaks contact with the chamber everywhere. And all of a sudden you've got a ton less friction, much easier to work with. If you have a totally cylindrical case, it's dragging on the chamber the whole time it's extracting. The way that this works with 5.7 in the P90 is they actually have a coating on the outside of the cases to reduce friction. And if you don't have that coating on the ammo, tends to have extraction problems. And it's not worth it to make, like, the benefit of having a high capacity magazine of this style is completely outweighed if you have to design a new cartridge to go with it. So I'm honestly not that surprised that we haven't seen more of that sort of thing. Clean Sweep says, hypothetically, FBRADM and Arms of America hire you for a brief consultancy because of your knowledge of the American gun market. What are the top 3 to 5 mistakes they need to avoid for their upcoming American release of the Grot rifle and pistol? The Grot being the new Polish combat rifle, which I did see is being released as a semi-auto in the United States. I don't know about top 3 to 5, but the problem with a rifle like that today is that it is very hard to distinguish it from all of the other options out there. It is like, it's a PMag adapter. Like, it's a device that you insert a loaded PMag into and then put bullets downrange. And like, what are the pros and cons of the Grot versus the Bren 2 versus the AR-18 versus the Brunel's BRN 180 versus the multitude of AR-15s out there versus all of the other short stroke, gas piston, rotating bolt 5.56 modern combat rifles? And the answer from a technical perspective is there's really not that much difference between all of them. So if I were on the marketing team for a product like that, what I would do is really try to highlight the story behind the gun and the associations with the gun. And I would talk about the history of FBRADM, and I would talk about its testing and use by Grot, or by Grom, the Polish Special Forces, and its use in the Polish military. And like, you want to build up the story around the gun because like, the gun's good. I've shot them at the Radom factory, but all the other guns are pretty good too. And so you need to give people a reason that they want to have that one instead of all of the other options. And it's probably not going to be a technical reason. So you're going to need to come up with some backstory associative stuff to make people really want a Grot, or price it lower than everybody else's. One of those two things. Manuel says, maybe this question is inappropriate, but what happened to the Max Popenker AK book that Headstamp Publishing was going to publish? Is it even still a thing? No, it is not still a thing. It ceased to be a thing when Putin invaded Ukraine. So Russia is currently under sanction. There is no legal mechanism for Headstamp or anyone else to say pay Max for royalties on his book. Perhaps more substantially, in theory, like, okay, we could do a book and, we'll just hold Max's money in escrow, and when the war is over and sanctions are gone, then we can pay him later. The bigger problem is we never quite got to the point in production where we had all of the photographs. So if you think back just a few minutes ago when I described what was necessary to do a book, it was information and access to guns for photography. Well, Max was supplying a lot of the photography for us from Russian state museum collections. And We had some of it when the invasion happened, but we did not have all of it. We were missing a lot of pictures of a lot of really interesting prototype sorts of guns, without which the book really wasn't justified. And the Russian government is, no surprise here, not particularly interested in providing photographs to an American publishing company these days, especially one that is associated with the pro-Ukrainian side of the war, for which I'm not sorry. That's how it is. There's good guys and there's bad guys in this war. And, the bad guys are the ones who did the invading. Anyway, like, we don't have the material to do the book. We don't have the economic means. Like, we would have to do a lot of roundabout, weird, and potentially illegal accounting to try and actually make that book happen for Max, and we're just not going to. So that book's dead. We'd love to have something similar on the topic. We've started exploring some other things. For example, you may have seen, we have a book, Rifles on the Danube, on Hungarian AKs. To my mind, at this point, the more interesting way to go would be to have a book on each of the individual nations that manufactured AKs. Because what you normally get is a Kalashnikov book that does, you know, reasonable coverage of the Russian side of it, and then just really skims over all of the other countries that produced AKs. I think that's where I want to see the information. Deeper dives into each of those countries, and having books on those that are each independently done by native researchers from their own countries, that to me is the best solution. So hopefully we'll be able to make that happen. We've got one. We're working on trying to find some others. So if you know someone, by the way, Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, Albania, East German, you know someone who's got the material, again, the data and the access to the guns to do a book on those subjects, send them our way. It'd be cool. Cosmoline Daydream says, hypothetical, he's definitely asking for a friend here, or she. You have an old NFA item with broken or incorrect database data. The item is legal, you own it, but the data fields are a mess. Many of the old registrations seem to be. That's correct. So things like make, model, manufacturer, barrel length, overall length, caliber. On old registrations, that stuff is hilariously wrong often, or so vague as to be indeterminate. I've seen more than a few registration forms where the manufacturer is like Japan or Germany. Like Germany, model machine gun, caliber 8, serial number 12345. And you're like, what is this? Maybe the model is Schmeisser. What does that tell you? That tells you nothing whatsoever. But at the time, like, that's how this stuff was getting registered. And by the way, those sorts of registrations are completely legal. Now, where they can cause problems is if you go to transfer the gun and someone's like, but wait a minute, it says Schmeisser on the registration form, and this is an MP40 made by Mauser, or something like that. So anyway, to cut this short a bit, yes, you can absolutely change that information as a private owner. What you do is write to ATF and say, I have this gun, and the manufacturer name is wrong. It says Mauser, and this is actually made by, I don't know, Walther, whatever. And you include some pictures of the gun, and you say, I would like to request that this be changed, and they'll do it for you. Like, I know ATF is terrifying to many people, myself included sometimes, but especially in the current political climate, there really are a lot more people at ATF who are willing and eager to help and improve the database than to be vindictive and just to destroy people's lives at any opportunity. So if you have a gun like that and there are mistakes in the form, you can absolutely fix them by writing to ATF, explain the problem, provide evidence, provide photographs of here's the thing that's wrong and here's what it should be, and yeah, they'll work with you. It's not as scary as one assumes at first glance. All right, we have a few more questions here. Wilhelm says, what are the relevant engineering trade-offs for maintaining bayonet compatibility in a firearm? Are the considerations and optimizations beyond the weight and bulk of the mounting point? Historically, there really weren't. It was just a matter of, pick the style of bayonet and have the little nubbin on the barrel or on the receiver, however it was set up. The thing that I would add today that's different, though, is suppressor use. We are starting to see really widespread use of suppressors on military rifles, and a suppressor is not compatible with a traditional bayonet because it goes over the same thing that the bayonet has to go over. So there are definitely ways that you could have a bayonet on a suppressed rifle, but I don't think I've ever seen anyone do any of them. I think we're getting suppressor use at the same time that we're getting a general trend away from bothering with bayonets, which may be a mistake. Bayonets are not the hand-to-hand combat weapons that they were back in World War I or before, but there is absolutely a use for them. Controlling people whom you are not actually trying to shoot is a lot easier if there's a pointy thing on the end of the rifle. So military police, guys who are guarding prisoners, taking prisoners, those sorts of things are legitimate, valid uses for rifle-mounted bayonets still to this day. But you're going to have to redesign how the bayonet works if you want to mount it with a suppressor. Next question. Alex and Brian and a couple of other people also actually asked, probably given that it's Christmas Eve, if there was one firearm you would want Santa to put under your Christmas tree, what would it be? Well, these are all fantasy ideas. A full auto select fire FAMAS would be pretty cool. A full auto select fire transferable registered LS26 would be cool. A KP31 Suomi would be pretty awesome. A PKM would be pretty awesome. Like, that's been my go-to answer for this question for a long time. If you could have one machine gun, what would it be? A PKM. I would love to have a PKM. That'd be awesome. In reality, I'm not going to get a gun under the tree because, frankly, as a reasonably advanced gun collector, nobody who knows me really knows what I want that I don't already have, and none of them are comfortable going out and buying an expensive item like a collectible firearm for me, so I buy all my guns on my own, and that's fine. Bernard, on this sort of subject, says, what is a collection? A lot of shooters own lots of guns without any particular focus or scholarship. That's fine and can be lots of fun. That's called having an accumulation. How many guns and what level of commitment is required to be able to definitively say, I am a collector of blah? The classic explanation I heard when I was much younger was a pair and a spare. If you have 3 of something of a specific deliberate theme, you can legitimately call that a collection. And I don't think that's necessarily wrong. I think a big chunk of what's required for it to be a collection is a deliberate intentionality. Like, if you happen to buy, like, if you own a ton of guns because you just randomly bought a bunch of guns and you look at them and you're like, let's see, well, 4 of them have brown bits, so I collect brown guns. That's not a thing. But if you very deliberately go out and look for and seek out a specific thing, I would say that's what you are collecting. And I know some people who collect, specific serial numbers, and it's not serial number 1. Like, they have a couple different people have a couple of different specific serial numbers, and they collect guns with that number. And that's legitimate. They could be, like, I have a friend who was actually in forensic investigation with state law enforcement, and does, professionally, he's retired now, but he was, he did the bullet rifling comparison. He collects guns based on rifling. He will have a pile of seemingly identical snub-nosed revolvers, and the difference is they are slightly different chamberings and slightly different rifling patterns. And he can look at them and go, oh yeah, in 1974, they switched from 5 left to 7 right on the rifling, or they changed the twist rate from this to that. And that was relevant for his work. That was an area of expertise that he needed to have. And so that's what he built up in his personal reference collection. And that's also absolutely legitimately a collection. Although what we normally think of is you collect something by nationality or manufacturer. Any of these things. As long as it's intentional, and I would say you have to have 3. That's a collection. Let's see, Christopher says, it seems like sights on battle rifles back in the day were optimistic. Why were they graduated out so far? Were there actually soldiers taking 1,000-yard pot shots with their Grot rifles? And how successful would those be? So yes and no. For an individual shooter, yeah, you're completely right. They are ridiculously optimistic. They're actually just fantasy. Like, you're not making a hit on something at 1,000 yards with the 1,000-yard iron sights on your Mauser. Now, there are some high-power competitive shooters who will do things like 1,000-yard open sight competition. In fact, my rifle coach in college was one of those guys, but he was using very good aperture sights specifically designed for competition, and he was shooting at bullseyes that were like 8 feet in diameter so that you could actually see them with the naked eye 1,000 yards away. You put a Mauser 98 in his hands and a silhouette target at 1,000 yards, and even he was not going to make that hit. The reason that those sights exist is because you would have units that would fire together in volleys. And we see this in a number of the early wars, although it doesn't get talked about a whole lot. Units are marching in formation, and so you could very easily be in a position where, you know, you and your 100-strong company of French infantry with their Grot rifles are holding this defensive position, and you see the Prussians come over that ridge, marching in a big block, and they're 1,000 meters away, and the commander of the company barks out some orders, set sights to 1,000, and, you know, aim and fire. And if 100 guys send a volley of bullets over into a target the size of another 100 guys marching in a big square, then you actually have a reasonable chance of getting a couple of hits. Or even if you don't get hits, you can prevent people from moving into a particular piece of ground. That was one of the uses of very long indirect fire with machine guns early on. You know, maybe you know there's a crossroads 2,500 meters away, you know, over a mile away. But your machine gun has its sight zeroed out to like 3,500 meters. Well, aim in the right direction, set the sights to 2,500 meters, and, you know, put down the occasional burst of fire. And what'll happen is someone looking at that crossroads is going to see the occasional poof, 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 poof of dust kicking up. And how many people are going to volunteer to run out into the middle of that? Like, your chances of actually getting hit are fairly low, but you're not going to march troops through that unless you really, really, really have to. So it's a way to interdict, to control territory. It's not something that was meant to be an individual marksman's tool. Ole says, do you have any plans to cover more Norwegian firearms? Yes, I totally do. I actually visited the Norwegian Army Museum so that I could get a look at what they have and get some photos and plan out a later trip. So I plan to make that trip. I just haven't had the chance to do it yet. All right, Tyler says, why do you think 30 Super Carry fizzled out so quickly? I thought it would revolutionize handguns and PCCs when it came out, but it seemed to disappear without anyone noticing. Yeah, it kind of did, and it's unfortunate. I really liked the cartridge. I thought it would have been really cool to have it become more popular, and in theory, it still could. I think the problem is it didn't really offer anything hugely different. It offered 20% increased magazine capacity while maintaining the ballistic effectiveness of basic standard 9mm. There were a lot of 9 parabellum loadings that were more powerful than 30 Super, but you got a couple extra rounds in the mag, and it turns out people weren't really interested in, you know, that wasn't enough benefit to get them to adopt a new cartridge. They already had a gun, they already had magazines, they already had ammo, and being able to put 12 rounds in the mag instead of 10 maybe did it for a few people, but didn't do it for enough. And at the same time, sort of chicken and egg scenario, there were what, I think 3 gun companies willing to make guns in 30 Super. Smith & Wesson did it with their, what was it, the Shield, I think. Nighthawk did it, which is kind of a bizarre one. Like, who cares? Like a single stack 1911 in 30 Super, I don't, who cares? To me, that's not a gun that's going to move the needle. And then High Point did it, which is cool, but like not really the same target market as 30 Super, I don't think. So it would have been nice if some other companies had come out. Like, it'd be cool if B&T came out with some of their PCCs in 30 Super. Maybe, like, to me, that's the right mixture of the right gun with the benefits of that you can get from 30 Super. But it didn't happen. So, I mean, that's more normal than a new cartridge offering a limited extra benefit actually becoming popular. All right, we now have 4 questions specifically about books. that I have put all together here at the end because they're all going to have, well, same style of answer. So we're going to go through these relatively quickly. James, oh, and my last bit of cocktail has gotten totally warm. Oh, it is still delicious, but not very cold anymore. All right. James says, I recently inherited my father's collection of long recoil shotguns, Auto 5s, Model 11s, etc. Unfortunately, I did not inherit his knowledge of them. Any good books or sources I should look out for? There is one book on the Browning Auto 5. It is published by Wet Dog Publications, Anthony van der Linden, on the Browning Auto 5. It's a good book. Doesn't cover much of the military side. If you need something on like the Marshall versions of the Remington 11, Bruce Canfield has a book on U.S. combat shotguns, has a couple of books on U.S. combat shotguns that are quite good. That would be your addition, but I would start with the Auto 5. I think this is still, like, it's not really in print, but it's still available from its initial print run, so it shouldn't be horribly expensive. Next up, Josie says, what would be a good reference book, not a coffee table book, for the Lee Enfield system of rifles, similar in detail to your book on French rifles, preferably something still in print versus something out of print that would be like $500 bucks. The answer for that is Ian Skennerton's book, The Lee Enfield. This is a big book. It's, what's it, like 600 pages? 604 pages. There's a lot of information in it. The downside to it is not well organized or edited. Ian Skennerton really needed a professional editor to go through and clean this up. It's one of those books where when you flip through it, you're like, wow, there's all sorts of cool stuff in here. And then when you have an actual specific question that you are trying to answer using it, you're like, this is a nightmare. There's 3 references to this question at completely disparate sections of the book, and I don't know what I'm missing in context between them. But it is by far the best book, the most in-depth book on the Lee Enfield system. And I think there have been several editions of this, so you should be able to get this without completely breaking the bank as well. And for all of its issues, that's the one I would recommend. Austin says, what are some good reference books on Japanese military rifles? I've recently built a small collection, 3 Type 38s and 4 Type 99s, 7 rifles. Arisakas deliberately have a commonality of Japanese military. That is absolutely a collection. Anyway, I would like to have good reference materials to go along with whatever I'm collecting at the moment. I have your father's book, but are there any other good resources to look at? For that, the go-to book these days is Fred Honeycutt's Military Rifles of Japan, currently in its 7th or 8th or like 98th printing. This has been out for a very long time. It is bigger than my father's book on the subject. Has a lot more information, but is nowhere near totally, like, there's a lot more you could get than this. And honestly, I will probably do one more good, serious reference book. Like I have plans for one more, and it will be on Japanese rifles. It will not be for at least a couple of years. So like, go out and buy this book. You can still get it relatively cheap because every time it sells out, they just reprint another edition of it. And it's pretty good. I'm going to do one that's better, but this is the only other thing out there. There's a group called Banzai that was a Japanese rifle collecting society that's sort of still around. They were really at their heyday in the pre-internet era. They had a newsletter, and some of their members wrote monographs on a whole bunch of Japanese rifle subjects, but these were like mimeographed, spiral bound, they do 50 or 100 copies, I think. And when they sold out, they were just gone, and a lot of the really eminent Banzai members have passed away now. And so those reference materials are very difficult to get. Honeycutt is your readily accessible option. And our last question is from Nick, who says, do you know of any technical books that cover the dimensional tolerancing of firearms or heat treating for firearms? I'm an engineer, and I have a few gun design handbooks, but I haven't seen anything like a case study of these parts worked well with X, this fit was loose, this fit was great on prototype, blah, 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 blah. Sorry, Nick, I do not. Yeah, I got nothing on that one. You're gonna need personal hands-on expertise from other people who've done it before, and general engineering books. I don't know of anything out there that is specific on that sort of technical detail of specifically firearms design. So, sorry. Anyway, that is our Q&A for December. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed that cocktail. Thanks very much to Kiro for sponsoring our Q&As. Once again, if you would like to try out any of their really amazingly good rye whiskeys, all 100% single malt rye. They have a peat smoke, they have a wood smoke, they have an Oloroso sherry cask finish, as well as just the standard rye, which is excellent by itself. Check them out. You can use the code ForgottenSpirit10 to get 10% off of all of their products if you're on their web store in the US, Germany, or Finland. And of course, thanks to all of the fine folks on the Forgotten Weapons Patreon for contributing the questions to this month's Q&A. If you'd like to have a Q&A, a question of your own in next month's Q&A, hop on the Patreon at $2 a month or more. And I put out a request for questions once a month, usually a week or two before I film the video. Thanks for watching. Oh, and Merry Christmas to everyone. It's Christmas Eve, isn't it? Have a great holiday. Thank you, guys.